Good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name's Cameron and I work in the disputes team at Safe Deposits Scotland, and I'm here this afternoon to give you the webinar on the tenant's journey as far as registering, staying in the property and getting your deposit back once the tenancy comes to an end. I will say first of all, this is my first ever webinar with Safe Deposits. As you can see, we're all working remotely, so I'm delivering this one from the comfort of my flat. So I'll ask you all to bear with me. I'll aim to spend about 20 to 25 minutes on the presentation itself, and then we'll go to some closing questions at the end. So if you have any questions, do just bear them in mind. We'll touch on them at the end of the presentation itself. And without further ado, let's get stuck in. Okie dokes. So one of the first things you're going to come across when the deposit is protected is something called the prescribed information. Now, this is a legal obligation, as in your landlord does need to provide you with a copy of this once the tenancy has begun. As we see there, it should be given to you within 30 working days. That's a point I'll touch on first of all. A lot of the deadlines that we're going to be talking about today are in working days. So 5 working days is approximately 1 week in layman's terms. So the prescribed information should be with you within about 6 weeks of the tenancy having begun. What this document does is establish the grounds on which your deposit can be claimed against by your letting agent. It should relate to points in the tenancy agreement and cover the information such as who the tenants are, who the landlord is, how much the deposit's worth. The only time that this will ever need to be updated is if there is a material change. And by that, what we mean is something in the substantive legal situation of the tenancy changes at some point. This would be if one of the tenants was swapped out for a fresh individual, or if the owner changed, the landlord changed. Next, what you can expect is what we call the deposit protection certificate. And this is what we'll grant you once we actually receive and allocate the funds. And that's an important difference, because once the money arrives with us, it will take a couple of days for our accounts team to actually allocate the funds to the correct account. Once that's been done, you'll be told that deposit's protected. Much like the prescribed information, this should be with you within 30 working days of the tenancy having began. Once it is, and once it's sent out to you, you'll know it's been protected. Make sure to get in touch with us at any point if you're concerned that the deposit's not protected. It could be something like incorrect contact information. We'll first see if we can email you. If we cannot email you, we'll give you a text if we've got the right mobile number, and it is a mobile number we've got. And in failing that, we will just send a letter to the property asking you to get in touch, as we will have a deposit for that property. What to do if you don't hear from us, or indeed at all, that where your deposit is? There's a couple of steps, because Safe Deposits are not the only company that's allowed to take Scottish deposits. There are 2 others, and you can see their names and their phone numbers listed there. That's LPS and My Deposits. What to do is check with your landlord or your letting agent. Just ask. It could be that they've just forgotten. It could be a simple mistake, or like I said on the slide before, we could have some erroneous contact information that you'll want to check up on. Make sure you contact each scheme. They might have it and it's been forgotten to be told to you, but if it is with us, we should get in touch with you. There should be a record of it there. Just ask your agent, and if you're in any doubt, you can always consider looking into the first tier tribunal if you're not sure. Now, if you have gotten the deposit protected and everything's going swell, when you get to the end of your tenancy and if you move out, we'll offer a service if there's going to be a potential dispute about returning your deposit, called alternative dispute resolution, the particular brand of which is formal adjudication, is what we offer. This will be an evidence-based process. It will be just as legally binding as court. The only difference is you don't actually need to go through the hassle of taking a case to court. It's all in the pursuit of a fair, just and reasonable outcome to any kind of disagreement over how parts of the deposit, or indeed the whole thing, should be repaid. These decisions will be carried out by individuals called adjudicators. They are not directly associated with safe deposits. They are outsourced. They're completely impartial. They'll never speak to you. They'll never speak to your landlord. They'll never visit the property. They are totally impartial, and they stick to a clear code of practice on how they should be reaching their decisions. They don't all come from a legal and a property background, sometimes both, or one and a mixture of a number of other areas of professional background. And they'll use all of that to inform the decision they make in line with the practices we've got, in line with the reasons they're allowed to claim from the deposit. Now, the things that they can cover when dealing with disputes are, as we can see on the left there, on the yes side, they can cover claims for cleaning, damages, missing items, unpaid rent, or any other kind of special obligation that you might have agreed to after the tenancy started in your lease. Those are the things that they can cover. Those are the things your landlord is allowed to claim from your deposit for. Then on the other side, we have the things that can't be taken into account. Any kind of counterclaim, any kind of other property-based argument that isn't to do directly with the tenant's deposit and their obligations to the property. Any kind of premium charges that are set out in the tenancy agreement can't be considered, and they can only adjudicate up to the deposit's value. As a final point, if your deposit was protected outside the legislative deadline, as safe deposits is not a punitive body, that is also something that we cannot take into consideration when making the decision on your dispute. How the adjudicator is actually going to arrive at the conclusion of their decision is a fairly straightforward process. The legal starting point is that the deposit is the tenant's money. It's paid by the tenant, it's paid to the landlord, they have to protect it. And even though it is the tenant's money, it's the tenant's obligation. That is your direct accountability to the landlord's property. The landlord would then need to provide evidence to support their claim. Provided they can do that, the adjudicator is allowed to award them the claim they're making. If they're not able to do so, we would need to return the funds to the tenant. What is important to understand from the word go to do with dispute is that it is a potentially lengthy process. What we see in the table below there is all the stages in consecutive order that they come. The first, or rather the two most important stages, are probably that first 5 working day negotiation period, and at the end there, how long it takes the funds to get paid out a further 5 working days. If negotiations are successful and an agreement can be reached, you only need to worry about those first and last stages. An agreement will be reached and our accounts team will make the payment within 5 working days. Otherwise, that adds up to between 70 to 80 working days, so 10 to 12 weeks in layman's terms, after you've asked for the deposit back and the deposit's gone into dispute if you disagree with any claims the landlord may look to make. So it's really important to understand that this can take a fair length of time to try and get to the bottom and get a decision published. Next, we're going to go on to look at some of the reasons you might not want to agree to claims made by your landlord. The first one is a counterclaim. This will be things like, as the first point on that slide says, I didn't pay my rent because. It's a tenant not wanting to fulfill their obligations in light of an outstanding issue that they've brought to either our attention or they've brought up with their landlord or their letting agent prior to the dispute being taken up with us. It is important to understand, even if there are breaches of the tenancy agreement on the agent's part, you should still be holding up your end. If your landlord has breached the tenancy agreement, you should still be meeting all of yours. One hand does not take away from the other. There is some legal advice out there on the internet for the Scottish private rented sector that you can withhold rent during the tenancy. It's not something we would always advise, because even if you can hold back your rent during tenancy, to try and do things like force your landlord's hand to make good on repairs or any other issues, it should still be paid back before the tenancy ends. It's not a period of free rent, so to speak. it can be claimed from your deposit if there are outstanding rent arrears. What I would say is if you have any serious issues, you do consider contacting the first tier tribunal. They would be the more appropriate legal forum to pursue those issues with. An offset is slightly different. It can still be breaches of the tenancy agreement, but this is more something you will have done as opposed to you're claiming against your landlord for. An offset would be you, for instance, perhaps purchasing a lot of nice furniture and then arguing that you don't need to pay your rent because the furniture that you've purchased is worth more than the value of the rent being claimed. As said before, you would still need to fulfill your own obligations even if you felt the obligations of the landlord were not being met. As before, if any of these issues are serious and do concern you, you should contact or consider contacting at least the first tier tribunal. As I said, the disputes process can be fairly long. What is good though is that Safe Deposits have in our resolution team, in our dispute resolution team, we have a number of dedicated staff that facilitate negotiations and try and see if there's any way that we can resolve the dispute before we have to start gathering evidence and sending the case to an adjudicator. The key benefits of this are that it allows you to stay in control of any amounts that you do lose out on, because you need to very overtly say how much you'd be offering or comfortable losing. It does save you that huge chunk of time in the middle and goes straight to getting the deposit repaid. It removes all the stress of gathering evidence of your own, looking at the other party's evidence, waiting to see what the adjudicator's decision is, and then at the end, if you're not happy with the decision, waiting to see if we would accept a review of that decision. It gets straight to the point and gets the money paid out, and at the very least, it's a decision you can be comfortable with that you reached yourself. It works in over 35% statistic there, over 35% of disputes. So 7 out of every 20 cases we get, we are able to speak to both parties and see if we can find amicable middle ground there. When I say we would speak to, what I mean is we will take the first step. We will contact both you and your landlord, or if it's a letting agent for your landlord, we'll contact your landlord as well, your letting agent, sorry, as well. And we'll see what both parties' stances are. We'll see what the gives and what the takes are, what the real legal situation is, and see if we can try and find some kind of solution to it, because the odds are it is possible, but we understand that situations do get quite heated. Maybe you've had a falling out, but you used to get on. You don't want to speak to the other party directly. We are happy to be involved, give free and impartial legal advice. As I said, I work for the disputes team. It's me and 2 of my colleagues that would be reaching out to you. Some of you might have already spoken to me or one of my colleagues on the phone, but that's what we do. We'll understand where you're coming from, and we'll try and see if there's a way we can find a solution down the middle. And like I said, the money will be paid back within 5 working days. The only thing we would ask in return is that as we are free and we are impartial, we just ask that you keep an open mind. It might not be ideal, it might not be exactly what you want, but we can try and see if we can negotiate, try and find a way through what is a potential minefield and get a result that you can live with. If that doesn't work, if the case does end up going into formal adjudication and we're not able to get an amicable solution, if me or one of my colleagues isn't able to help you try and find a middle ground, we'll go on to evidence gathering. And this is where you will, as the tenant, will have a chance to provide your own evidence, but perhaps more importantly, your landlord or their agent would need to provide the evidence that would back up the claim they were making and demonstrate why you'd breached your obligations and they're making the claim that they are. There's 2 kinds of evidence broadly that can be provided. The first one is essential. As you see there, these are things that every case needs. Is a tenancy agreement, the check-in and the check-out, either inventories or reports, the schedule of condition of when you moved in and when you left your tenancy, and then if there's rent arrears involved, we'd need a rent statement. Other stuff that can be helpful would be photographs, videos, any kind of proof of cost, or if it's any kind of specific issue, any correspondence that covers that, or anything else indeed. The list could go on, as there are multifarious claims that can be made, anything could be covered as long as it's applicable. The reason that the tenancy agreement is so important is that it is the starting point. It should demonstrate what the property is, who the parties are, whose obligations are where, how much the deposit's worth. If there is a deposit deduction clause where the landlord sets out that they're allowed to claim from your deposit if you breach your obligations, it can of course include any other specifically negotiated responsibilities, anything else that you would have agreed to in addition to the standard obligations the tenancy agreement sets out. It's signed, it enshrines the principle of fairness. As I said, it's the starting point. It very clearly, very transparently states whose obligations are what and who's responsible for doing what when the tenancy ends. This takes us on to the proof itself, the schedules of condition, the inventories. These just record the cleanliness, the state of the condition, all the different things that are involved in your tenancy, the rooms, etc. And what the adjudicator is going to do with both the inventory at the start and the inventory at the end is compare them to see the differences from when you moved in and when you moved out, and then make a decision based off of those differences. If it's cleaning that's being claimed for, they'd need to be happy that the cleaning was worse when you moved out than it was at the start. They'd make an award if it was. Then the rent statement, last piece of essential evidence. If there's rent arrears involved, this will cover how much the rent is, what the balance is on the account by the time the adjudicator looks at it, what period it's being claimed for, all of the raw black and white facts and figures that are going to show exactly who owes how much by what date. It's really important, as I said earlier, that you keep copies of any transactions that are made, you keep your own bank statements. Things can get lost, like I said, but this is the last time you do want them to get lost. Like I said, it's very black and white. You're going to want to stay on top of this just in case. If you, like I said earlier, have been withholding rent to try and force your landlord's hand if you're not happy about repairs or any other kind of agreement you might have reached, it's times like this you're going to want to make sure you have a record of when you made good those payments. Make sure you get a receipt if you do pay in cash as well. Most letting agents use online accounting systems. You don't want that to get lost. What you can do, however, as a tenant to keep yourself on the right side of the deposit protection is when you move in, you will be given a copy of the inventory. You will have, normally it's maybe 7, 10, 14 days to look at the inventory, go through it and come back to the landlord or your agent with your thoughts on it. You should absolutely do this. If there is something that you notice that's off, perhaps the inventory says professionally clean throughout, whereas you don't feel like the property is professionally clean, you should flag this up within the deadline to your agent. And it can be up to them at that point to either amend the inventory or make good that the property is professionally clean. It's really important that you do this, as this sets the bar essentially for how you need to return the property. If the property is professionally clean at the start, if it says it on the inventory but it isn't in reality, you noticed it but you didn't report it, you will need to have the property professionally cleaned or be held liable to that value from the deposit when the tenancy ends. It's really important that anything you notice, any damage issues, any missing items that are listed on the inventory but aren't there, are reported. Just take some time with it. Go through everything as forensically as you feel like, as much as you're comfortable with, and then return it to your landlord. Like I said, cleaning is one of the more popular items of dispute that we get through. Probably the most important bullets on this slide are the first and the last ones. Cleaning is not an issue that can be offset by fair wear and tear. Fair wear and tear relates to the condition, whereas the state of cleanliness is something else. The key example I give here is an object can be clean but broken, or it can be functional but dirty. They're not always mutual, those notions. So make sure that you understand what if something's clean but it doesn't work, or if something's broken but it is still as clean as it is. Those are important distinctions to make. As I said about the inventory, you're going to want to make sure that you return the property as is on that inventory, returned back the way you got it. That's the legal obligation. You return the property in the same condition you received it. And that last bullet point there, you are not, your landlord is not obliged to allow you to return to the property once the tenancy is ended. Once the final date of your tenancy has passed, that is the bar set for the condition of the property you've returned. You can't go back to the property unless your landlord wants to allow you back in, if they're happy to do so. Otherwise, this might just need to be a bullet that you bite. Redecorating. The property is your home. You can make yourself comfortable, but it is important that you get in writing any changes. If the wall in your flat is like mine, it's a plain neutral colour, and you ask the landlord to paint, make sure everyone's clear over if you're going to paint it magnolia or you're going to paint it Barbie pink, because people take things differently. Your landlord might not be happy with that. Make sure it's in writing if you agree to make any big changes. Pets. I am an animal lover. I love dogs. My boss owns a budgie. She's a tenant as well, but not everyone does. And make sure you get permission. Some landlords aren't always enthused about the idea of having animals in the property, and that is totally okay. If they're happy to let you take a cat or a dog or whatnot, make sure you get that in writing. They might want to amend the tenancy agreement or take a top up to your deposit. Just make sure there's a record kept of all of this. Particularly animal hair is going to really affect soft furnishings. Maybe there's going to be professional cleaning required just to make good on that. These are all things that are worth establishing and agreeing on at the start. Mold is an exceptionally common issue, but the good news is it can be avoided easily. If you do notice mold when you move in, make sure you report it, just like anything else. But for when you are in the property, make sure if you're drying clothes on radiators, you've got the windows open. Just keep your pot lids on your pots if you're cooking a lot and boiling things, because the mist will accumulate, the steam will accumulate, and will start to cause mold issues. You just want to get ahead of that. If you need to get dehumidifiers, make sure you do. As for gardening, this is much like everything else, something that you will need to return to the landlord the same way you got it. The most important thing about this is that the landlord's not obliged to provide you with the tools you need to maintain the garden. Have that conversation at the start of the tenancy. If it is a tenancy of garden, who's responsible for it, what they're going to expect it to be returned like. If it's a case that you need to pay a factor or a local handyman a certain amount of money every month or every now and again to maintain the garden, that could save you a headache at the end of the tenancy. But if you get a garden and it's well kept, make sure you return it well kept to the landlord, otherwise you could face a deduction from your deposit. When we get to fair wear and tear, this is just the accountability for the average everyday use of an item, object, or an area as the tenancy goes on. It covers the damage or the depreciation to an object or area. It's not, like I said earlier, it's not cleaning. It is to be expected, but it would only be damage if it was more than the average everyday use. Scratching plates, if you've got crockery in your tenancy, scratching them is one thing, them being broken when the tenancy ends is another. Here's a better example of what is and what isn't fair wear and tear and damage. If you have a look there, things like scuffs, carpets going fuzzy over time, for plaster cracking, those are all things that just happen as objects age and get used. Damage, on the other hand, would be if children drew on the walls. It would be any kind of overaction that caused something. Walking on a hardwood floor, if it's, for example, a hardwood floor, that's fine. If you're a tap dancer and you do your hours practice on that hardwood floor and the floor is scored by the end of the tenancy, that would be damage. When you are coming to the end of your tenancy, you're going to want to make sure that you keep yourself right with a couple of these things. Make sure that you give the correct notice. Make sure if you've been given notice, you understand when you need to move out of the property by, just so you don't make yourself more liable for rent arrears than you'd like. Make sure that you give the correct information, the contact information indeed that we've got up to date. If you are a student and you're staying in a tenancy over the course of your time, a semester or a year at uni, make sure it's not an academic email address we've got. Sometimes universities close off those email addresses. just before the end of your tenancy, and we'll be emailing a dead account. So make sure we're able to get in touch with you. Probably the most important point here is, like it says, do not confuse when you move out to when the end of your tenancy is. If you want to move out next week and you tell your landlord today will be the start of your 28 days notice. If you move out next week, you will still need to pay rent for the next 28 days. You'll be held accountable for it, and the condition that the property's in on the end of that 28 days is what you'll be held accountable till. If you clean up until next week and 3 weeks go by and then dust has settled, you will be held responsible for any dusting, for example, that needs to take place. Make sure as well, once you have moved out, the final day of your tenancy is passed, your tenancy's ended, you try and get in touch about getting your deposit back and start the ball rolling there. What you should do just before you move out is much like you did when you moved in. Get the inventory, make sure you make good any changes you can, make sure everything's the way it was when you moved in or as it was on the inventory. If there's been anything that's broken or damaged or that's badly changed over the course of the tenancy, make sure you've got records of this. It is reported in due time, and you're not going to surprise your landlord with a big problem like a radiator leaking or being broken, for example. That's going to disingratiate yourself. So just make sure you keep those lines of dialogue open, you stay in touch with your landlord, and you let them know if there's any trouble. If there are things that have gone wrong, you can foresee them as being your responsibility, but there's nothing that can be done about them now. The best idea is to own up to it, have the conversation, however uncomfortable it might be, with the landlord. If you need us to do it for you, if you'd like to speak to us about it to see what your obligations are beforehand, please do so. Maybe if it is something that you're responsible for and you're just not happy about the cost, some kind of deduction is probably going to be likely. It could be an idea to see about reaching that middle ground, either yourself or with us, like we spoke about earlier. The landlord's going to do the same thing when they move out. They're going to check the property the exact same way you have. They'll come at it from a different point of view, but it could result in a deduction being made from your deposit. I'm going to move on now to our closing questions. So I'm going to open up the chat function. And there we are. So you should now be able to fire in if you have any questions. Anything and everything we've covered, please do ask. If you've noticed anything down, I'm going to give it a moment to let the questions come in, after which I'm going to then pick and choose some. If there's any questions I'm not able to answer, we'll send them out to you later on. Just remember, folks, you can either send a question publicly so that everyone in the chat room can see it, or you can send something privately if you don't want your name to be revealed. Okay. Wala Zachariah asks, will there be a recording of this session? The connection was slow at the beginning. Well, what will have happened is you shouldn't have experienced any lag at all. This should be catching up, so we'll be keeping the session open for a little longer if you are a bit behind. But we will keep a recording of this session. We will email out to all attendees, and the odds are it will be going on our YouTube channel as well. So follow us on the same social medias and you'll be notified once the full recording and the questions at the end are posted on our socials and on YouTube itself. Okay, I've got a private question here talking about the current public health crisis, COVID-19. They're asking, will this remove your notice obligations? The answer to that is unfortunately a resounding no. If you have been forced to move out of your tenancy earlier on because of the coronavirus situation, you've become unemployed or have to move home to self-isolate. As unfortunate as that is, coronavirus is temporary, whereas tenancy deposit regulations and your tenancy agreements obligations will last for a lot longer. You will still need to honour your notice period. It is a harsh truth, but sometimes this is what the deposit is here for. If you've not been able to go back and clean the property at the end of your notice period, that there's not very much that can be done about that. Sometimes agents will be sympathetic, sometimes your landlords will be. The best thing you can do is be honest with them and have that conversation as early as you can to try and limit the bad will that could foster there. So no, unfortunately, you will still be held to your full notice period for the rent and for the cleaning. Okay, Rose Crawford is saying that she's spoken to a client recently where arguments have gone on since September 2019. I will say, first of all, Rose, if your deposit is with us and if nothing has happened with the deposit yet, you should get in touch with us and make the claim. A deduction should be settled on, because at any point the tenant could get in touch with us and wish to make a claim on the deposit, at which point you will have 30 working days to decide if you want to make a claim or not. A number should be settled on. If there is serious arguments going on with numbers back and forth between the parties, or the client's not sure what they want to claim, I'd recommend maybe getting in touch with us and we can have this discussion more in depth and find out what the actual issues are. Another private question here. There is a tenancy coming to an end and there's potentially going to dispute. No details on what on, but if you're still in the property or you've handed in your notice and nothing has happened with the deposit itself yet, your landlord's not spoken to you about maybe making a claim, you don't know if you've left the property in the right condition, you should definitely call us on the company number. I'll read out now: 03333 213 136. And if you press option 5, you'll get through to the end of tenancy pre-dispute advice line. And this line will route typically to me or one of my colleagues. And what we'll do is discuss any potential issues. We can try and forecast what claims might be made and to explore the ways that we can try and avoid a claim being made. It might require you having to meet more obligations, or carry out more work to try and avoid that if you need a return to do cleaning, or maybe need to accept when your notice period runs up until. But if you're in any doubt and you want our advice, free, legal, impartial advice, get in touch with us on that end of tenancy line, the company number, then option 5. Okay, I've not got any more questions just now, folks. I'll give it another few minutes and I'll see if any filter in. If you do have a question, like I said, you can either put it publicly, everyone will get a chance to see your name, or if you want to just send it to me privately, you can do that and I will still answer it anonymously for you. I'll probably take this brief moment to thank everyone for turning up. I don't know where you are, but I'm in the East End of Glasgow and the weather's lovely outside. So thanks for taking about half an hour out of your day to sit in front of a laptop or a phone screen and listen to me talk about potential deductions on your tenancy deposit. But I hope everyone has had the chance to take away at least something from this talk, be it about when your tenancy begins, if there's things going wrong during your tenancy, or when the tenancy ends. Okay, Anna Lisovska, I want to pronounce, is asking if the slides from this webinar will be emailed to us. Yes, actually, no, the slides will be emailed to you, should be in PDF format, but the full recording will be made available to the general public as well. So you'll be able to find that on the Safe Deposits YouTube channel. But yes, we'll get back to you with the slides on this presentation. Anna Lisovska says, thank you, and you're welcome, Anna. It's probably worth mentioning, just as a closing point, I see questions are drying up, but it's probably worth mentioning that what we've spoken about, the disputes, the deductions, any potential arguments you might have with your landlord, this makes up the vast minority of cases well over 98% of deposits we get come into and out of the scheme without any problem at all. Less than 2% of the time, the cases actually go to dispute. So the odds are, most of the time, everything should carry over smoothly and shouldn't have any large issues. Most landlords and letting agents who are tuning in will find this too. Most of the time, tenancies go on and no one does have any troubles. This is just for that once in a blue moon rainy day situation, which does unfortunately happen to some people. I feel it's important to have this support there for when that does happen. This is why we have that end of tenancy advice line for when your tenancy ends, just to double check that you're not setting yourself up for any kind of dispute about the deposit. Alrighty, folks, I'm not seeing any questions coming in anymore. I'm maybe going to leave the webinar window open for another minute or so in case there are people that did experience lag during the call. They can catch up. If you do have any questions that we're not able to answer at the moment, by all means forward them over to us. See, Rose is just questioned in again. Can we give the helpline number? I'll say it again and a little slower so people have a chance to write it down. It is the main safe deposits number 03333 again 213136. And after you ring that line, you want to press option number 5. That line is for anyone who has a tenancy that's either just ended or coming to an end. You're not sure what your obligations are, or if you're not sure there might be a dispute. Anyone can call this line, letting agents, landlords, tenants. If you're unsure, if you just want some free legal advice, impartial advice, specifically to do with the deposit side of the deduction, you can call that number. It'll probably be me. It might be one of my colleagues that answers. Okay, I'm seeing a few thank yous coming in. I see that there's about a dozen of you. We're creeping into our 38th minute, so congratulations to all of you for sitting through that. But I'm just going to end the session now, I think, folks. I'll thank you everyone again for turning up. I hope that you got something out of this. Please do let us know if you've got any serious thoughts, compliments or criticism, and we'll use that to inform the next webinar. You have made this very easy for me on my first Safe Deposits webinar. Hopefully I don't get my jaws for this one, but I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll close the session off there. So thank you, folks.